And welcome back. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard on WHCR 90.3 FM. This is Patricia here. We're talking about the minimum wage. During the State of the Union address, President Obama proposed an increase to $9 from the current minimum wage, which is $7.25. So we're having a discussion here. We have David Weinberger, who opposes the minimum wage and opposes an increase to it. And we have Paul K. Sonn from RaiseTheMinimumWage.com, and he says that we definitely needed to raise the standard of living.
I really don't think at the end of the day this is a beneficial policy, and it's not compassionate. It actually hurts the people it's intended to help, and I think there's better ways to alleviate poverty. So, no,
Right.
I'm not in favor of raising the minimum wage, and in fact, I'm in favor of eliminating it entirely.
Oh, interesting. Government. Yes, Paul, same question, and you can reply.
It's David gave a really excellent summary of the economic research on the minimum wage up to about 1990. But what's really interesting is there's been a real reversal in the economic profession's understanding of the impact of the minimum wage. Until about that time, it was assumed that increasing the minimum wage reduced employment somewhat, but over the last 20 years, economists have developed more sophisticated ways to actually look at what really happens in the real world when one state raises their minimum wage and the other doesn't. And this research started 20 years ago with research by two Princeton economists, one of whom, Alan Kruger, is now the head of the President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. And they found that the predicted job loss effects when one state raised the minimum wage and the other didn't materialize. Since then, there's been a huge amount of research, and there have been what we call meta-studies, which are studies kind of reviewing and cataloging all the studies. And the new meta-studies show that the overwhelming majority of the rigorous research points towards negligible job loss effects, which is really, really interesting. And it's actually one of the interesting things about it is it's resulted in a real about-face, not only among many leading economists, but even the business press. We've seen now, as a result of the new research, that business publications like Bloomberg News, Crane's New York Business, and The Economist magazine, these are bastions of free market economics, have reversed their position, recognized that a higher minimum wage doesn't cost jobs, and endorsed raising the minimum wage. And there's some outlier economists who argue against it, but it's chiefly this fellow David Newmark, who David Weinberger mentioned, but his research is less rigorous. Respected economists have noted that it really doesn't actually measure what's going on really in labor markets. And incidentally, he actually takes funding from the restaurant industry to finance some of his research, which really ought to raise some questions about it. But the key thing is that leading economists have now understand that raising the minimum wage doesn't hurt employment. And you might ask, why is that? And the main reason is that ultimately the marginal cost of low-wage labor is a small factor in hiring decisions. And what really dictates whether firms can hire new workers or consumer spending, market growth, market demand. And actually, that's the key area where people are realizing that raising the minimum wage really not only helps the workers, but helps the economy, because it puts more money in the pockets of low-wage workers who spend it at local businesses. And if you look at the small business owner monthly polls, they show consistently that weak sales or uncertainty about sales are their number one concern. The wage costs are way down at the bottom. And that's, President Obama, Governor Cuomo, and others who are now calling to raise the minimum wage recognize this. They've realized that you can't build a recovery on poverty wage jobs. And, what's happened is our economy has been shifting more and more towards these low-wage jobs. But this sped up a lot after the recession. We lost a lot of mid-wage jobs, and a lot of them are offshore, never coming back. And the fastest-growing jobs are these low-wage jobs, the retail, restaurant, the home health care jobs, where the minimum wage sets the pay scale. And that's where more and more working adults are spending their careers. The median age in these low-wage jobs is 35. 80% of the workers in these low-wage jobs are 20 or over. And most of them, in New York, the average worker who would get a raise from raising the minimum wage contributes almost half of their family's income. So these are not teens earning iTunes money. These are the frontline jobs that make our economy run, and raising the minimum wage is one of the key things we can do to help these workers get by and help jumpstart our economy.
Thank you for that, Paul. Just bringing up both of those points together. I've been on both sides of this. I've been a business owner, and I know how stressful it is to either not be making enough money to not pay my employees well, and that really hurting me, both because I wanted to pay them well and also because I needed to make money. So there is definitely a two-sided thing here. But I just want to say, when I had to, when we had a business, it was me and my fiance, and we needed to pay our employees. A lot of times we went without paying ourselves just so we can pay them. And in order to cover those costs, we would raise the price of the food that we were selling, and we would pass it on to the consumer. And I know that this is one of those things that people say, like, well, this is why it's going to, kill, it's going to increase the rate of inflation. Like I said, we didn't want to fire people because we felt that they needed those jobs and they depended on us to be job makers, but we also did increase our prices. So I'm not necessarily saying that, my one little small change in the one small store made a huge impact in the entire United States. But, what can you say to that? I mean, David, you first. I know that this is an argument that definitely conservatives make.
Well, right. Well, Paul brought up a great point that there may not be mass layoffs. You may not see people actually losing jobs as a result of this. That much may be true. But what the data does show is that employment growth slows, especially among low-skilled workers, when the minimum wage is hiked. And that's just basic economics because the demand curve slopes downwards. In other words, when you raise the cost of something, you get less of it. That's true with stocks. It's true with a commodity. It's true with anything. Higher costs reduce demand, and the demand for labor will drop when you raise it to $9 an hour. So it's not necessarily that people are going to be kicked out of their jobs. As you say, employers can spread that through costs, pass them on to the consumers, or they can do other things like reduce hours or reduce benefits. And one more point here. I just like to pose a question. If I were someone who wanted to work for, say, $7 an hour, right now the minimum wage is $7.25. If I wanted to work for $7 an hour, and there were an employer who wanted to hire me for that rate, why should the government say no to that?
Actually, Paul, can you reply to that? Because I know that you definitely speak about raising the living wage of people.
No, well, to his credit, David's making the full, libertarian case that there should be no minimum wage, which, most politicians won't do because they know, the public doesn't agree with it. But it's to his credit, he's consistent. I mean, it's sort of the same argument for why we have any public policy or regulation. Say a boss says to a worker, I'll pay you more if you'll sleep with me. We've made that illegal, and there are lots of other types of economic exchanges that we think that it helps the economy and helps workers as a whole to prohibit. And the minimum wage is one of them because it sets a floor. And what the research has shown is that when you say you have to pay workers at least $9.19 an hour, which is what the minimum wage is in Washington, that actually employers don't slow their hiring. They're hiring. The research that I summarized earlier has found it's not looking at job cuts. It's actually looking at the rate of job growth. And what's so interesting is the new research, the research that's persuaded the business press like Bloomberg News, Crane's New York Business, and The Economist magazine, has found there's been no reduction in hiring when the minimum wage goes up. So you're not putting anyone out of a job. You're raising the floor at the bottom in these fast-growing jobs where workers are spending more and more of their careers. And so it really is one of the few things we can do to improve incomes. And, since the recession, average family incomes and median wages have been plummeting across the country and much more rapidly in New York than elsewhere. It's this profound shift towards these low-wage jobs, and raising the minimum wage is an effective public policy that boosts these incomes. And actually, it's interesting. I actually came across a blog post where David was lamenting that Bloomberg News and the business press have now reversed position and are supporting raising the minimum wage. So I was intrigued that David has been following this trend, that they are persuaded that the research shows no job loss. And I gather, it sounds like, David, you're probably against the minimum wage, even if there were no job loss, just on libertarian principles. Well,
yes, that's exactly right. Look, I think this demonstrates a basic distrust of people deciding what's best for themselves. I think if someone wants to work for a certain wage and there's an employer that wants to hire them, I don't think it should be the business of government to step in and say, no, that shouldn't be allowed. In fact, you're right. Aside from the employment consequences and the economic effects, I just don't see the harm in that. Look, I think we'd certainly both agree that we want people to earn a good wage and a good living. But I also believe that people should decide these things for themselves.
Yeah. So one real interesting thing right here in New York, sort of on the political level, is, things are really moving quickly around minimum wage. There was in the State of the State speech, Speaker Cuomo came out and proposed $8.75 an hour, increasing the minimum wage. Then President Obama last week in the State of the Union called for $9 an hour plus indexing the minimum wage, which is one of the key reforms. Right now, it takes literally an act of Congress or an act of the legislature to increase the minimum wage, and until they cut through the gridlock and do that, it often will stay flat, frozen for many, many years at a time. 10 states have ended that by adopting annual cost of living adjustments in the minimum wage, where the minimum wage goes up 15 or 20 cents every year to keep pace with the cost of living, and it takes it out of the political process. President Obama has called for that nationally. Speaker Silver in the Assembly has called for that in New York, and there's a real leadership opportunity here, just like on gun control, where Albany can move quickly and forcefully on a front burner national issue by adopting a higher minimum wage and indexing for inflation like 10 other states do.
Thank you, Paul. David, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we have to go on a very short break. And, just to kind of consolidate what you guys were talking about, I know there's an argument to say that maybe we don't need it at all, that it's a personal choice. But, I mean, we brought up minimum wage to mitigate the terrible conditions that especially women worked in sweatshops where they were paid very, very minimally. They didn't have any breaks. So, I mean, to say that they didn't work historically, I think it's a little bit of an overstatement. We can definitely talk about the economic situation that we are in now and why it might not be good to increase it. But I'm not sure I quite understand how minimum wage laws do not help whatsoever, because I think that we do not work in the same conditions that these men and women used to work in the sweatshops in the turn of the century. So, guys, this is WHCR 90.3 FM. Let your voice be heard. We'll be right back. We're talking about minimum wage. Take it away, Stan.
Listening to Let Your Voice Be Heard.
Today, this is the topic. Let's talk about sex. How do we handle this issue?
There are a lot more risky behaviors in drinking or drug use that affect sexual activity.
You might build a community. The police officers make more of an attempt to talk to people. They're going to be people who just don't like the cops. So when we have our guns, then, what's the solution?
Do you welcome homosexuals in your church, Pastor?
I'm never going to treat you differently. Never going to put you down. I'm going to say this to you, though. I'm not gay.
They're not stripping or searching or frisking me.
Let Your Voice Be Heard radio.
Every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
And welcome back. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard on WHCR 90.3 FM. This is Patricia here. We're talking about the minimum wage. During the State of the Union address, President Obama proposed an increase to $9 from the current minimum wage, which is $7.25. So we're having a discussion here. We have David Weinberger, who opposes the minimum wage and opposes an increase to it. And we have Paul K. Sonn from RaiseTheMinimumWage.com, and he says that we definitely needed to raise the standard of living. Stanley here, our engineer, has a question for you, man. Stanley, lead away, and please direct which one's going to answer the question first.
Yes, I actually know exactly who I want to answer the question. And David, this question is for you.
Okay.
And Paul, you can respond afterwards if you'd like. So raising the minimum, right now we know that in order to qualify for public assistance, you have to be a single person making no more than $11,000 a year and a family of four making no more than $20,000 a year, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if we raise the minimum wage, wouldn't that price out a lot of those people from getting public assistance, which would save us money on food stamps and other things like that, which would be a good thing because we can take that saved money and maybe give tax credits to businesses?
That may be true. I don't know. But to me, the real question is it better to have, does somebody want a job or does somebody want to be receiving benefits from the government? And in some cases, they should have both. There are certainly cases where people need assistance, even though they're working in a minimum wage job. But if you're pricing people out of the job market entirely, and I don't think that's helpful for them. I think
I didn't say the job market. I said they would, because they're making more than, because it'd be raised above the poverty line, they would no longer qualify for public assistance, which would save us money and entitlement money on funds that we spend on public assistance, food stamps, what have you.
Then they'll be able to afford their own food and their own services, right? No, go ahead, David.
I don't know. I don't know the numbers on that. I do know that food stamps have expanded tremendously over the past 3 years, and the threshold, the income threshold, has been growing as well. So, look, I don't know. I don't know the numbers on that.
Well, the reason I ask is because over 3.8 million people are currently working for minimum wage. If 3.8 million people working for minimum wage at between $7.25 an hour to $6.50 an hour, if you can go that low in certain states, I think it is. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If their wages were suddenly raised to $9.19 or $9.80 an hour, that's about $24,000 a year, which means you no longer qualify for public assistance. I know because I had a roommate who, she was making $9 an hour, and she was getting around, I think, like $11,000 a year. Then she got raised to $10 an hour with 40 hours a week. They cut her food stamps off the next day.
Yep. Wow. Well, it's a great point that when low-wage employers are effectively shifting some of the cost of supporting at a minimally decent level their workers, shifting it to the taxpayers, to you and me, by not doing their part in paying a decent wage, and that's so there are some savings for the taxpayers if we raise the minimum wage and make sure all employers do their part. And one key thing to keep in mind is the lion's share of the low-wage workers affected by the minimum wage don't work for small mom-and-pop businesses. 66% of them work for companies with 100 employees or more. So these are, very disproportionately the large national chains, the fast food chains, the big box retail chains, other, cafeteria companies that have mostly recovered since the recession, seeing strong, if not in many cases record profits, and they can afford to do a little more. And what's interesting is we're seeing more businesses come out this time in support of raising the minimum wage than ever before. We've seen a number of trade associations, small business trade associations, the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, big chains like Costco, companies that say, hey, we think it's manageable to pay higher wages, and not only is it fair, but we actually think it helps the economy, giving more workers a little bit more money to spend at local businesses, boosts sales, and helps get the economy moving. Yes. And retail sales have been down a little bit since January when the payroll tax holiday sunset. Raising the minimum wage is something we can do to boost spending and get an extra month or half month in job growth resulting from that increased spending.
Thank you for that, gentlemen.
Let me just add one more point here real fast, and that is There's no such thing as a free lunch. So to the gentleman's point who was asking me the question,
Stanley.
If we raise the minimum wage to $9 an hour, and in other words, you swap out benefits for the minimum wage raise, well, it's just switching the composition of how taxpayers are paying for that, because either it's going to be passed along, the cost of raising the minimum wage to goods and services, in which case we'll all be paying for that, or it's paid directly through taxes. So it's really just a switch. It's not that you're saving money one way or another. And either way, it's going to cost people money, because this is, in the words of Milton Friedman, there is no such thing as a free lunch.
I want to just get in here. I think that a lot of people who talk about, how this hurts low-wage workers, and they talk a lot about teenagers, and they say, this is going to price out teenagers from getting jobs. As a teen, I did a lot of odd jobs, but I actually always got paid well. I can't say why, but I used to tutor, and I used to get paid really well for my services, so I was a little lucky. I used to babysit, and then later on, people paid me well. I'm not gonna lie. I used to, as embarrassing as it is, I used to make more money as a teenager, or at least per hour. Not necessarily, I couldn't work as many hours as my parents, but I did. When you really balance it out, I made more money than my own mother, and it's always been the case, even when I was 15 years old. And as a college, I studied engineering, and in my internships, I got paid, $18, $19 an hour, and I was very lucky. Like I said, I was able to save a lot of money, travel, pay off my tuition. So that extra money, that extra boost, put me in a position that my mother is still not able to be in. So I do see the benefits, and I do definitely contribute back, because I do pay a lot in Texas, and believe me, I shop. If you don't know anything, I shop. But I just want to, especially, you can start, David. Do you think it's going to hurt teen workers if we raise it? I mean, my sisters definitely are working at minimum wage at the moment.
Yes, I do, because I think it will prevent many from being able to find jobs in the future. But what about the people right on the cusp of that? Say somebody who's earning $9.20 an hour. And they're not going to feel the benefit of a wage increase the way you're describing now. So at what point do we cut that off? Why not raise it to $10? Why not 11? Why not 12? Why not 20?
Well, it's a good point. I don't think you mean this, David, but $9 is really not enough. The U.S. minimum wage would be almost $11 an hour if it kept pace with inflation. Washington State has a much higher minimum wage. Several U.S. cities do, and the research shows that we could safely raise the minimum wage back to that range to $11 an hour, without any risk of job losses. The job loss, the research has looked at minimum wage increases over the past 20 years in that range, and those are the range of increases that have found no appreciable job loss. So you're right, and New York, of all the places where we need a higher minimum wage, New York is top of the list. It's one of the highest cost of living places in the U.S. It's a state where what we really need in New York is a minimum wage closer to $10 an hour or more, which is what governors in Illinois, Maryland, what legislators in Connecticut and Massachusetts are calling for, and so really Albany should be pointing in that direction.
It is pricey.
On the teen thing, it's a couple of points. One, you shouldn't get distracted by teens because they're only about 16% of low-wage workers who would get a raise if New York raised its minimum wage to $9. But it's not that you don't want to care about teens, but the research has looked very specifically on the impact on teen hiring of when the minimum wage has gone up, and found no evidence of any reduction. And that's key because teens really are potentially the most vulnerable segment of the labor market. If there was going to be reduction or slowing in hiring, you would expect to see it there, but there has been no evidence. It's one thing though to understand is teen employment has actually been going down for the last 20 years, whether the minimum wage has gone up or down, and it's partly that the kind of middle class teens are spending more time in school these days. It's also partly that for teens who are working, they're facing more competition from older workers who are working at Home Depot, who can't afford to retire, who are working at Walmart. So it's there are a lot. We need more money for teens for other jobs and other stuff, but we shouldn't get distracted. They're not.
Right. It's sorry to cut you off there because we're running a little bit short on time.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely as a team, I contributed to my household, so it is important, but I definitely see what you mean where it's a very small percentage of the workforce. And Selena here has a question for you guys.
Yes,
Selena.
I just wanted to say. So, first I just want to start off because personally I think that the minimum wage is a good thing. It's beneficial to society only because, I understand when David was talking about, some people would want to work for less. But, I think that people who would exploit themselves or say, I'll work for anything that you give me because of desperate times and desperate measures, they would do that. But we should protect those people who are struggling and who would do anything just to feed their family. But the question I have is, when minimum wage is raised, do all other salaries typically go up as well? And I ask that because I know working in starting or entry job positions in media or even in retail, they start you out on, if you're a manager, at $10. So if minimum wage goes up to $9 and people who are doing more menial jobs are working for $9, do you think, and I guess does history tell us that the other jobs...
That's right. There's what they call a ripple effect where workers making about up to $1 above the new minimum wage level, even a little higher than that, all get higher wages. So raising the minimum wage really has the possibility to shift up wages all across the bottom of the labor market, and frankly, the higher we raise the minimum wage, the bigger those benefits are. I'd be interested in David's views on this. It's been really interesting the conservative voices that have started to come out for raising the minimum wage. Ron Unz, a former Republican politician, they